Welcome to Beneath the Surface podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Bortz, the Millennial Rabbi. Join me as we talk to high-impact people around the world, discovering deep, meaningful ways to live life beneath the surface. Have you ever felt an urge to pursue a new path and calling? Do you carve away time in your busy schedule to ever be alone with yourself and delve inwardly? I discuss this and more with Jackie Engel, who was once the resident psychologist on Australia's Today Show. She is now the founder and director of SouledNYC, working with young professional women to learn and grow, and is the director of leadership development at Olami, fostering young Jewish leadership around the world. Hi, Jackie. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Rabbi Dan. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. I'm really excited to speak and schmooze about stuff.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. I wanted to have a good conversation with you for a while. I've heard some of your teachings and things online, and really like what you're doing in the world. So maybe could you share with me and the rest of us what you're up to, how you got to this point? Just a little short biography about yourself.
2 lines. Okay. I grew up in Sydney, Australia, and had nothing to do with anything Jewish. I couldn't care less. I was as far away as possible, as you could imagine. And I had a great career, psychology, had a private practice. I was on the Today Show, which is the same as the American version. We basically copy you with everything.
Wow.
And there was I had a segment on there, and life was great. And we had this very pushy relative who was very strongly identified as culturally Jewish. And she said, "You've got to go to Israel." And I had no interest whatsoever. And I was stubborn. I did not go to Israel. I went backpacking with my friends. And she gave up on me basically. And she started with my brother. My brother was weak. He gave in. He went to Israel and had a ball and had an amazing time. And he started learning a little bit about his Judaism, and he got into it a little bit more and a little bit more. And as he slowly started taking on more and more observances, like Shabbat, I couldn't get hold of him Friday night, and he wouldn't eat out in the same restaurants with me all the time. I freaked out and I thought, oh my gosh, he's joined a cult. And I have to rescue him as a psychologist. It's my obligation. So there was only one small problem, is I had no idea what it meant to be Jewish, and I couldn't argue anything intelligently. I just knew he was wrong. And that led to a series of very honest and real discussions with him about Judaism, and realizing that I was completely ignorant. And here I was on national TV saying the way to happiness is to embrace all of who you are and all those things. And here I was as a Jewish woman having no idea what it meant to be Jewish. And I felt like a hypocrite. So at that time, I said to him, all right, introduce me to a rabbi. And I've got to go to Israel. And that was the beginning of the journey. And I showed up in Israel and found that everything I really, truly believed in, that was a principle of psychology, and all of my career, I found the source in Torah. And I was literally blown away. And that began a journey of really realizing at the age of 30 that I had to educate myself. And that's the least that we can do, is to at least educate ourselves to make educated decisions, which is now what I dedicate my life to, which is to being an educator. So giving other people that opportunity. And I ended up in Israel for 6 years, ended up teaching in Israel, and then ended up getting sponsored on a visa and a green card to be now in the States, in New York City, running programming and working for a global organization called Olami, which means my world and global at the same time, which is a beautiful idea. And I run a director of leadership development, trying to find other leaders also to empower and get out there and to make a difference and share the beauty of Judaism and the wisdom.
Beautiful. I love it. I think one thing that stands out is the fact that you said at 30 you did it. This week I posted something on Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva story, one of the greatest rabbis of all time. But at 40 years old, he didn't know the alphabet. Could be very easy, very understandable to say it's too late. It's not, regardless of age. Everyone thinks, even if someone's 20, they say, you know what, I've already started college, I've already gotten my life. But the pursuit of truth is a lifelong endeavor. And if something calls you, you shouldn't let your circumstances stop you from, pursuing that calling. So.
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful idea. It's more about tuning into what calls you, and tuning in and listening to your deeper self, because people so often, they know which direction they want to go in, and they have a deep gut feeling, but they ignore it because they're in the rat race. They're in a situation they think they can't get out of. They're in a relationship they can't get out of. But deep down, they know that they should be going in a different direction. And you can only ignore that voice for so long, because it gets louder and louder and louder, and it starts tapping you on the shoulder until you can't live with that internal tension anymore. And I think that's really what happened for me, is that at the age of 30, I had this whole life built up, which was great and successful and wonderful. And I was ignoring and kept ignoring this core part of myself that kept saying, hello, but you're Jewish. There's something different about you here. You got to explore it. And I tried to pretend the best I could to just be like my non-Jewish friends. And I just couldn't ignore it anymore at some point. And I think that I didn't know where it would end up. I think that the key is not knowing. People like to plan where this is going to, what this is going to look like. And you just don't know. You have to be brave enough to go on the journey and start at the same, that next step, whatever that next step is, and let it unfold from there. We don't often know the whole picture ahead of time. And just being brave enough to let, God and life take you where you're meant to be going, and just listening to that inner call, as you say, that deeper calling, which is so important, and listening to your inner truth in that way. And I didn't know where it would lead me. I just knew I needed to be educated about it. And that was important. So I didn't set up with this Rabbi Akiva idea. There were times where I felt really humbled by the fact that I was 30 and I had no idea what Aleph Bet was really. And that was very humbling for me to step out of my role as the Today Show psychologist and like all the image of what that means to be successful. And every time, I'd go to a party and say, yeah, I'm on the Today Show, I could see their face change, like, oh, you're the Today Show. Like, it gave me a lot of identity to be doing that. And when I went to Israel to explore my Judaism, and when you go to Shabbat meal, for example, even a Shabbat meal, it's not about what you do. It's about who you are. You just show up as a Jew to the table, and everyone's a Jew, and your brothers and sisters, and you're just there together. And that's why Shabbat's so awesome, right? Because you step out of the role. And I think that was probably the hardest, but the most powerful and healthy thing I could have done, is to have stepped out of all this role as psychologist and Today Show, and went to explore, what does it really mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to be a Jew? Separate to all that. And it was scary and humbling. And at the same time, it was the most inner sense of building myself that I ever had in my life. And that's life-changing and worth everything.
That's very interesting. What you're very self-aware. I had a similar journey at an earlier age. I left college that I'd worked so hard to get into after 1 year, and went to learn yeshiva for 6 years as well. But I didn't really think of that concept, that I did have some sort of social structure. I knew how to be successful in the world that I was in my own way. And then you enter a new world. You have to be willing to, like, I joined a yeshiva with kids like 4 or 5 years younger than me. Like it could be, but for me, it was about my goals and my journey. It wasn't about like, how do I match up? It wasn't a social trying to be cool or anything. You took away all pretenses, and it was just the thirst for knowledge and discovery. Like, you could have a 15-year-old kid who studied, Torah his whole life, and in a certain mental way, I could be 40 and trying to learn Gemara with him, Talmud, and I'm like a child in front of him. So it's not always an age thing, or it's how far are you along in your journey to understand something new. And everyone who wants to do something new has to be willing to be that beginner when they do it. So
beginner's minds, right?
That humility, yeah. I'm reading this book called Stealing Fire. Have you seen it?
No.
It focuses on how throughout history and today, more so than ever, we're all searching for, they call it ecstasis, like an ecstatic experience, but it means anything to like transcend our daily lives. It could be anything from people who take drugs to going to music festivals, to Burning Man, to sleep deprivation tank, to taking coffee, or anything to get you to another state. So clearly there's a big human need for that. I think they said $4 trillion a year is spent. It's almost it would be more than almost any country worldwide is spent on the desire to transcend the mundane. So, wow. And I think I heard you talk about the idea that in the past, there were many like Jewish prophets. There were the idea of like meditation and prophecy and transcendence was an integral part of Judaism. It wasn't gefilte fish and, just kind of, having the matzah. There was a lot of what people think Judaism is. There's a lot to it. So can you touch on the idea of how maybe integral that is to us, needing to maybe find a way to transcend and get deeper within ourselves, and not just continue the 9 to 5 and find that deeper place within ourselves?
Right. And I think you just hit on it there. The real yearning is to connect to a deeper place in ourselves, as opposed to using it as escapism to get away from ourselves. And I think that people mistakenly confuse those two. So they think that, the drugs are like a template really for what you could gain without the drugs. But people like it and it's artificial, so they just keep doing it, but it's not real. It's totally illusion. And people are yearning for that deeper connection to really, it's their own soul, or deeper self, higher self, whatever you want to call it, because that really is an imprint that's already in us that we know is the direction that our life should be going in, that there is more to life than the rat race. My favorite saying I used to say was, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. So
all
like
time.
meaning it doesn't, even if you win at whatever it is you're doing, it doesn't give you that ultimate fulfillment and meaning. And I think that that's many people you can see who have what they call midlife crisis / breakthroughs, right? Or awakenings, is because they have everything that they thought they should get to feel successful, and they're not fulfilled. It doesn't give you that fulfillment. That was me at 30 also. I mean, I felt successful and I loved what I was doing, but I knew there was something more. I knew there was something more that I was missing out on some level, aside from my brother joining a cult. But I'm realizing that he really helped me in the end by
It
showing
must be
me.
very disorienting to reach the top of something and not get the happiness that you're expecting, because the world tells you this is what will get you that feeling. So when you don't, it must be a bit shocking
Right.
for people.
It's not shocking because it's not in one hit,
Right.
but it's whether or not you want to choose to be in denial about it and just continue in escapist way, or whether you want to acknowledge, wait, there's got to be more here. Let me start looking in a kind of an honest way. And I think people are terrified to be honest with themselves. They desperately want to connect deeper with themselves. That's why the meditation and self-help wave has taken off. And Judaism, what people don't realize is that Judaism has it all there at your fingertips. It's literally a map for that. So Shabbat is integrated, for example, into the week, literally for that same idea of connecting in a deeper way to yourself and to God, and having more of a spiritual connection. Can you use Shabbat just to eat and sleep and party? And I said, it depends how you use Shabbat. For example, if you can use Shabbat either for connection and depth and holiness and some sort of sense of spirituality, or you can use the same Shabbat for disconnection and for partying and escapism, getting drunk, just eating, sleeping, being like a slothville,
Right.
in your physicality. And it's up to you how you always use it. So I find Shabbat really is that kind of peak experience if you let it be. Not in the same as, God forbid, taking drugs or just partying, but I meditate on Shabbat, for example, and I have the opportunity on Shabbat to go much deeper in myself. I often have deeper insights about life and about myself on Shabbat when I've separated myself from my weekday and there's more quiet and I unplug from my phone, and like digital detox. Digital detox is becoming a thing. It's just so funny that it's interwoven into the Shabbat, into the Jewish system. And I think that yearning for something deeper is absolutely a human need, and it should be listened to. What will take me deeper into myself? That the next question comes up, which is that when I go deeper into myself, I also have to be willing to experience pain that might be there, or fear that might be there, or other feelings that aren't ecstatic and only positive. And most people don't like to feel those feelings, so they shut themselves down. And that means they don't get to feel the joy and the transcendence and the ecstasy that comes with tapping in deeper if they have to feel the feelings of pain and fear. And unfortunately, it's not a valve you can just switch on and off. One way I just want to feel the positive feelings, the other way, I shut off from it's all the same pipe. So you got to be willing to feel and be curious about and see what's inside of you, and not be scared of it. And people are scared of these feelings. They think something's going to happen to them. They're going to be out of control. It means something about them, as opposed to it just being an emotion or an energy that just needs to move through you, or needs to be acknowledged, or needs to be recognized. And when you get brave enough to look inside and just say, okay, what's going on, without judgment, just with gentle curiosity, which is the whole posture of meditation, is to explore yourself internally with gentle curiosity, then all of a sudden doors open, all of a sudden things shift, transformation happens, healing happens. It's incredible what can happen when you just bring gentle awareness and gentle curiosity to your inner world. That's when spiritual connections happen. You literally expand. And I just love this. I get so passionate about it when I help other people find that connection in themselves also.
Discovering themselves maybe for the first time. A lot of times we think we have to do something to get to a very high place, when really it's more about it's removing all the clutter. There's like a lot of noise,
Yes,
a lot of things coming our way, especially today. And I work with teenagers. I ask them, have you ever just sat alone quietly, like in nature, no phone, no friends, no nothing? Like, it rarely happens that we are quiet alone with ourselves. And like you said, maybe it's something we're afraid of what we might find being alone with ourselves or something, but the magic is there when you're able to really get in touch with your soul, which I believe is, there's a saying, you got to nourish the soul like you nourish the body. We don't spend much time with that side. We're at the gym, we're doing all these things, but a daily meditation.
You got the earphones in, the ear pods in.
Absolutely.
Everyone likes stimulus coming in. But I think it's the same reason, Dan, like that when people are silent with themselves, they have to sit with whatever is going on. And people aren't comfortable with that, whether it be I'm just uncomfortable because I feel vulnerable, or I'm just uncomfortable because I feel my own stress, or I'm uncomfortable because I'm like agitated, whatever it is. And just being able to use the muscle of being aware and just curious and non-judgmental. Once you actually can bring a sense of that frame or that perspective to yourself, it calms it down. But sometimes it's hard to do that. It's good to do that with someone guiding you into it. You know, so take a meditation class, jump onto one of our podcasts. We have a lot of podcasts, even though I run a women's program for meditation. They're online for free on iTunes, SouledNYC on podcasts, SouledNYC. And there's tons of other meditation, you know, Headspace, you know, non-Jewish apps, Headspace, Calm. They're fantastic for just being, again, having a guide you into something deeper. But I just can't say how invaluable. A lot of people in Australia, when they graduate college, they go traveling all around the world. You know, a lot of places they go traveling. Why? Because they want to find themselves out there in different countries. And you just don't find yourself out there. You find yourself in here. And there's nothing wrong with traveling. I love traveling. But it's not going to give them the clarity that they're looking for. And often it's a lot closer than we realize.
It's so true. It's so true. You know, I remember I saw a video somewhere. This guy comes to the Lubavitcher Rebbe for $1, and he says in Yiddish, he said, I came to find a bissel Yiddishkeit. I wanted to find like some spirituality, some Judaism. And the Rebbe points to him. I'm watching this video. He says, you'll find much more in your heart, much more inside than coming here to me or anything. It took me a while to understand what he meant. I'm like, what is he talking about? But, you know, it's all, if you have a divine soul inside, that means you have a spark of God in you. That means if you can somehow connect to that spark is connected to everything, and it's automatic.
Exactly. And that's what they call the soul, right? That spark that's connected to everything. And that's what people tell me, you know, when we go to a class or you go to something or you hear something that it resonates as true, and you're like, oh yeah, I knew that. Like I knew that. And I just didn't have words for it, but I kind of knew it. It's because it resonates within you, and because the impression is already inside you. You can only kind of resonate with something as being true if you kind of already knew about it beforehand. It's not brand new. You kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. Or yeah, I knew that, but I didn't know how to word it. We already have a roshem, an imprint inside of us from the soul that knows what that truth is. And until when it's reflected in front of us is when we get clarity of like, oh yes, that's true. So we have to follow that spark and what resonates.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's, I know there's certain mitzvot, certain commandments in Torah that the Torah says we would know on our own, meaning not stealing, not murdering. It's incredible. But the Torah says, you know it. Your soul knows what's right and wrong. We're going to give you some commandments that you won't understand. And, you know, you're going to have to kosher and certain things, but we do have this intrinsic ability to recognize good and bad. And for those who want to follow all the things we're talking about and connect, I know we have prayer every day. You know, there's a couple times a day we have prayer intervals, which I had a rabbi tell me once. It's like, imagine you're taking a spaceship from Houston and you're always checking back in. You know, Houston, we have a problem. Your soul comes down to earth, and a couple times a day, or at least once a day, you try to check back in. Like, remind yourself that you're on a mission. You're not on the rat race. You're a soul on earth. But what are some other? Is it 5 minutes of meditation a day? What kind of, or is it trying to be mindful when you're in nature or not in the synagogue? It's something you can do throughout the day. Are there some tips you have of keeping perspective or keeping like?
Yeah, I think you have to definitely get a mentor. Okay. Some sort of mentor is always an objective check outside of yourself. Always really helpful to have a mentor that you choose a mentor by seeing how they live their life and saying, I want to live my life like that. Not to be them, but I like the pathway that they take. So that's number one. Number two would be learning Torah and educating yourself in Torah, because the more you do that, it's literally soul food. Literally, it literally feeds your soul, and that's where you get access to that aha moments and those resonant moments of like that. Oh, that makes sense. That's true. And the deeper you learn, the more deeply that affects you. That's number two. And number three is build your own relationship with God. So it doesn't have to be formal in the prayer book. If that's not for you, you don't resonate with that. It definitely has to be a real connection that you build from inside yourself, and it can be just talking in your own words. If you're not sure if there is a God, so exploring that. If there's no greater question that you could answer for yourself that will determine what type of life you will live, is if there is a God that loves me and is involved in my life. And then there's all the questions that come up as a result of that. Well, if there's a God, how could there be a good God if there's suffering, and all of what's the role of suffering in life? And all those questions are very, very important questions to ask. And obviously, to do it justice, it's more than a quick podcast. but those questions to follow and ask, and then start to, a relationship with God is not an academic subject. So whilst it should make logical sense to believe in a God, the real relationship comes through obviously living with idea of God, a bigger picture, a bigger being involved in your life, and watching. There's two ways to have a relationship. One is you talk, and the other is you watch the response, right? In any relationship. So talking to God is prayer, talking from your own heart, in your own way, in your own time, and however you want to do it. Is real. As long as it's real, there's no fake image you have to be able to talk to God.
The listening side is so huge. That I never thought of it that way. The idea that you're praying and you're asking and you're doing from your side, but the listening is almost the subtle art throughout your day and throughout your life, recognizing those messages. Exactly,
seeing God in your life. Like, how does God show up in my life? Now, many situations it's very subtle. And it's not obvious, and it's something you could easily have overlooked if you weren't paying attention, or it's something you could say, oh my gosh, how random. Like, oh my gosh, that happened. What a coincidence. How random. I hear that so many times. And it's like, that would be fine as long as it wasn't so like that so often, meaning it's statistically improbable for something to be so random yet perfectly coincidental regularly, because randomness doesn't happen so regularly. So if it's random once in a blue moon, okay, but if it's random but coincidentally kind of perfect a lot, it's statistically improbable that that's just random.
It's hard to blame people because the entire science, the entire universe is predicated on this idea that the most insane randomness resulted in this. I heard it was Michael Turner from Chicago Fermilab. He said, if you take a dart from one end of the universe and you throw the dart and it lands in a bullseye on the other end of the universe, that's pretty much the fine tuning of our universe. And we say that, it's just a random thing. So it's embedded almost in our culture, unfortunately, but you're right. It's to recognize, nature is just a constant miraculous thing, but because it's happening on a consistent basis, we just go with the flow. We
just say it's normal, right? Well, I think that there's all, the idea is that we always get free will. We always get free choice. We can choose to see it or choose not to see it. Right. God's not pushy. I always say, I think he's British, he stands back, he waits for an invitation. He doesn't come in and say, hi, I'm here. Like, it's obvious, because then that would remove our free will. So, we wouldn't really get to choose to have a relationship then. So we always could choose to say it's random, it doesn't exist, and be believable about that. But you get to choose not to do that too. And so this is really only for the people who are curious and want to explore. For those that don't want to, God bless them, and they'll have a life however they want to have a life, because we get free will, we get to choose.
Right. That's crucial. Just to kind of, wrapping up, you work a lot with young Jewish leaders as well, and leadership. And what does leadership? Not every person's going to be running an organization or taking on necessarily as big of a role as you have. And especially when you're younger, you kind of want to go with the flow. You want to rather fit in as opposed to standing out and leading and taking a front role in things. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you think being a leader means to you? How can we incorporate that aspect to our lives, regardless of who we are and what our work is and what we're doing?
I think a leader, again, like you said, not everyone wants to be a leader. That's totally fine. Leadership is really about having clarity about who you are and where you're going. And through that clarity, other people follow you because they want it to. I think the world is very lost and very dark and very upside down and very confused, especially with the moral compass and moral values. And seeing where that's leading the world is not where most people want to go. A lot of broken down relationships and people aren't happy. So that we know for sure, statistically, people are not happy. And so when they see someone with a clarity and with a direction, even if they don't know if they want to do everything that person's doing, but they see the clarity, that's really leadership, because people are inspired to follow that person. And I think that all that means for us is, as individuals, is just to, again, go deeper inside, start asking the questions just to myself first, and start exploring and start getting clear. And if I'm not clear, finding mentors to ask and learn from, and not giving up until we do that. We usually make that thing like it's a side hobby. If I have time, I'll do my spiritual thing, as opposed to I go to the gym one day a week. If I'm lucky, I do my spiritual thing one day a week. The rest of the life, I'm doing my rat race. So I would encourage it to be the opposite, that this is really your foundation of your whole life, to understand what do you believe in, what do you value, why do you value what you value, how are you living your life, what's important to you, all these bigger pictures, who do you want to be in the world. These are really foundational questions, and if you haven't asked them, it's never too late to ask them. And to get clarity on that is always the first step of leadership. You know, our slogan for Olami in leadership is be the change. That you can't do anything in the world really unless you live it and you believe it. I mean, you can, but it's fake and people kind of get it at some point that it's fake. If you really want to make real change, you have to be congruent and integrous with who you are. And that's where we start. We start here.
Leadership, yeah, it's living as an example. So the first step, as you're saying, is to embody, find your truth and live that. And if you want to be able, but just living your truth and living it is already leading by example and people seeing you live your authentic self. I remember
you can affect hundreds of people that way just by being yourself without 100%. Doing anything. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask parenting tips, but I hear similarly the idea of being the example and it goes for many examples. When I started my social media and making videos and I guess becoming some sort of like a public figure like 3 years ago, I sat with a friend of mine and I told him, like, listen, I'm young. I have rabbis I know that are much greater in their knowledge and in their time teaching. Like, who am I to kind of teach? Which is this question, like, who am I to be a leader? What qualifies somebody to be a leader? And he said, you're looking at it completely wrong. He said, imagine how many people will only be able to relate to your specific style. And by you, if your false humility, more like fear or anxiety, whatever it is, not stepping up and teaching, you're depriving them of that connection. So I think a lot of times we think, especially when we're younger in general, like, who am I? When really you're the future leaders are you. I mean, you're the next generation. So don't think of it as, don't always question yourself to such a degree where if you have something to share and you believe it'll impact people and bring value, especially in this digital media world with all the negativity that's already out there, I think it's probably a good idea for you to share it if it's positive. So,
right. Passion and responsibility. If you're passionate about something and you want to step up and take some responsibility you see no one else is doing it and you jump in, you know, where there is no man, strive to be a man. It's Pirkei Avos, ethics of our fathers, right? Jump in when there's no man, when no one's doing something and you feel passionate about it. That might be your, sign from God, so to speak, that's your calling to jump in. And unfortunately, we let fear limit us a lot of the time. But again, if you have a good mentor and you check in, like you checked in with your mentors, such a beautiful thing. They gave you the encouragement to jump and do it. You might not have done that had you not had a good mentor. That's why finding a mentor, get a rabbi, get a rebbitzin, get a mentor, is really, really important.
That's great wisdom. Jackie Engel, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great speaking to you, and good luck with all of your amazing leadership in leading the charge with social media and getting the message of Jewish wisdom out there.
Thank you so much. And we can find you, SouledNYC, Jackie Engel. We can find you online. And if you're in New York, we got to come check you out.
We're in New York. Yeah. Happy to.
Na